If we were in a classroom, I'd ask you to turn to your left and then turn to your right. Most of you know that in the next 100 years, all of us will be dead. And that's not meant to scare you, because death is a part of life. But most of us will be able to choose our final resting place. Those who lived in Saluda River Valley that then turned into Lake Murray could have never conceived that their final resting place would then turn into an underwater graveyard. Let me ask you a question. Do you know how the world will change in the next 100 years? How about the next 50? I grew up in Lake Murray. I spent half of my life there, and right under my nose were these underwater graveyards that I never knew existed. You could be living, walking, swimming, even standing over a disturbed graveyard that you would have never known existed. Any of us, when we pass, could be living in a disturbed graveyard because that's just how the world changes. Underwater graveyards are not at all uncommon anymore because water is taking over. In this example, I'll talk to you about how Lake Murray was created, how being underwater affects the bodies, and how these bodies are now affecting people today. Lake Murray was a man-made lake built in the 1920s, and at the time was the largest in the country. Saluda River Valley, which it overtook, had to move 6 schools, 3 churches, and all of their homes, but left the graveyards. The only reason we know of these graves popping up more recently was because of a pressure release in 2002. Now, like I said, these graves are being discovered even today. And one of the more recent articles that came out in Cola Today, published in August 2019, found bodies, homes, and even a plane in Lake Murray. Unmarked graves are more common than you might think. Headstones can only show a fraction of the deceased population because there are a lot of dead people. And graves are everywhere, even if you don't realize it. New York City, Alexander Hamilton, Pennsylvania, and Benjamin Franklin. I mean, their graves are in the middle of nowhere, but also in the middle of our great cities. Unmarked graves are more common than you think. Even in cemeteries, there are bodies that you would never know of. But what's happening is that we discovered gravestones, headstones, in Lake Murray. That's what's been discovered more recently. One of the issues that we have was that Saluda River had a population of 5,000 and already had 193 graves before the lake was flooded. More bodies are showing up every day, and we really don't have a count of how many could be down there. Now, one issue is that bodies decompose differently in water than they do on Earth. Dr. James Caruso studies the effects of this decomposition and shows that temperature, microorganisms, even the clothes you are wearing can affect the way that you decompose underneath the water. And these disturbed resting places, they're haunting. All bodies are disturbed, but those underwater a little bit more than others. One issue is these bodies that would normally float are now being held down by their own headstones and slabs of concrete, keeping them disturbed and keeping them underneath the water. An issue is that we don't want these graves to remain disturbed, so we're reaching out to family members who may have had people living in the Saluda River Valley. They're being contacted every day for these graves that are over 200 years old. Saluda County Family Search is a website that I found that are reaching out to people even today to understand the anonymous bodies that are still underneath the water and try to connect them with living relatives today, just to figure out what to do with these bodies. Let me throw some statistics at you. 54.6% of people were cremated in 2019, and it has risen every year. See, in 2004, only 31.2% of people chose to be cremated. Cremation as we know it was only really invented in 1873. This was after those that had died in Saluda River Valley were dead. They didn't know what cremation was, so there's the issue of, do we disturb their bodies by bringing them up and cremating them, even if they wouldn't have chosen it themselves because they didn't know what it was? The issue is, do we move them and re-choose their fates, or do we leave them and let them sit at the bottom of this lake? Change happens, and we're running out of graveyards. Bodies get lost and graves become disturbed. It's a fact of life. Citizens are now being made to choose for these loved ones that they would have never known. Your great-great-great-great-grandmother that you've never interacted with, and you have to re-choose their future. What do we do now? It's a personal choice of what we do to our bodies. So why do we get to choose for someone that we wouldn't even have known? And remember, they were left that way by their close loved ones. What you should do is make a plan and talk to your family. Let them know what you're thinking about where you want your body and where you want your future to lie. Because the world will throw you a curveball, and your plans will change, even if you don't realize it. Within the next 100 years, any of us could be living in a disturbed graveyard, and bodies are being discovered as we speak. Could they have foreseen what happened to them, such as those in the Saluda River Valley?